Michael, you look so nice. You're on mute.
Hello.
There you go. Hello.
Oh, good.
Hello.
Sometimes I forget. I'm not sure if I'm on live or this is Memorex. You know what I mean? So you get a little. Am I really there?
I don't think we've met before.
Good to meet you, Mike. Is my
Well, thank you.
is my microphone working loud today enough for people?
I
Yes.
can hear you very well.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Don't be too nice to him. He'll start to think he.
Did you say don't be too nice to him?
No, don't be too.
Oh, no worries. Are you ready, Jan?
Can't make my hair
No.
any grayer. My hair is as gray as it's gonna get.
Oh, mine has a lot more gray to go.
There we go. Okay, headphones I think I'm okay.
Default microphone has changed. Jan, say something to me to see if I'm really.
John, are you saying anything? Your mouth's moving.
I think I'm here on my headphones. Let me take them. Hello.
Anybody else hear him?
Nope.
Can you-
There
Yeah.
they go.
I can hear you, John.
And
What's
just
that?
I can't.
just so
hear.
everybody knows, we're live.
So don't tell any embarrassing stories about ourselves or our families.
Depends.
I feel like, that commercial, the lifetime operator will be ready to serve you. And there I am with my headphone.
Well,
Hi, Shelley. Hi, Denise.
Shelley,
Hello.
hello. Tina, Mike, Mark, Sarah.
John's counting, I can tell.
Hey team, I have a PMIK Hale waiting to join. Is that somebody joining your meeting?
Peter.
Got it.
You're not leaving, are you?
No, I'm going to stand because, I don't know. I've been sitting too much. I hate to say that. So if I stand, I'll probably be I can't fall asleep for sure then, or I'll fall over. But the other thing is it helps my back a little bit. And you get to be a certain age and, well, those kind of things happen once in a while. So.
It's probably good for all of us, actually.
Yeah, it really is. And I sit way too much and it's showing in lots of ways. So glad to be up.
So are we just missing Liz?
It looks like it.
The superintendent come to this meeting?
Yeah,
Yep,
she's here.
there.
Yep, she's there. Hi, Denise.
Oh, I see you're in the corner.
Yeah. But it depends whose spot you have or what screen you're on.
Yeah. Sorry.
I haven't moved from this morning.
I don't believe that. I don't think any of you are sit around people. I think you're always on the move. Oh,
was gonna do this too. There, that's what I wanted. There, questions?
Well, we'll give Liz one more minute and then we can get started. I just texted to see if she was delayed.
Hello.
Hey, are you jumping on?
It says please wait for host to start.
Oh, John, you need to let Liz in.
She's not in the waiting room. I'm wondering if she's in the wrong meeting.
She, John is saying he thinks you're in the wrong meeting. Is this for Wednesday at 4 for the work session?
Hit the Zoom link.
Make sure you hit the join Zoom.
I'll send a new one.
I hit join Zoom, but I clicked on Thursday. Hold on.
Okay.
I'm sending a new link.
Okay. She's coming. No, she said she hit Thursday so she can get out and go to the Wednesday one.
Okay.
That's got to be a lonely meeting
All
right
the
now.
days are kind of a blur. Yeah. Not a lot of drama. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. She should be joining us momentarily. Thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to welcome everyone to the April 22nd, 2020 work session on the transportation contracts for Stillwater School Districts for next year. I'm just going to say part of our statement just to inform people that, you know, we are having, due to the current federal and state emergency declarations and the Minnesota directive to residents to stay home, our school board is being conducted in accordance with the Minnesota statutes 13D.021, meetings by telephone or other electronic means. Due to the health pandemic, the school board has determined that it is not feasible for at least one board member, the superintendent, or the school district's legal counsel to be physically present at the regular meeting location, and that it is not feasible for the public to attend this meeting at the regular meeting location due to the health pandemic. Persons may monitor this meeting from a remote location via live stream on YouTube using the link on the school district website. And just as a reminder for school board members today, we will not be voting during this meeting, but we will obviously have lots of questions and comments. So to make that go a little bit more smoothly, I think it might be a good idea if you have something you want to say to just go ahead and raise your hand. And then I'll do my best to try to keep it moving without us all talking over top of one another. And so with that, I'd like to just kind of briefly state a little bit of a background for the public and for the record. The purpose of this meeting today is because our current transportation contract with Minnesota Central is due to end on July 31st, 2020. And so therefore, we as a school district are interested in having a new contract in place that would begin August 1st for our school year for this coming year and perhaps for the years as much as 4 years. Just a little bit of a background, we did go out for RFPs for this contract back in November of 2019, and we received responses in December. We received 5 responses. However, at the end of January, we became aware of some issues with our bus garage, which has become somewhat problematic. And so a lot of questions have arisen since then. And so we are here now to try to work through some of those issues, to have a conversation about, as a board and as a district, what do we think is best for us to go forward. And I actually haven't planned we have lots of experts here in this meeting. I'm not sure who to go to first, but I'm just going to guess that maybe Jan Vanderwall might be the right person. Can we turn it over to you, Jan?
I'll try to get started. What I would like to do is we have, as you may know, there was a finance committee meeting where I delivered a short report with recommendations, and there were many questions that came out of that report. And Dr. Tyne suggested that we put together some questions. The board members put together some questions, and then we would work on responding to those questions. We've developed a document. I've been responsible for getting most of it together, but I've gotten a lot of help from various people. And what I would propose to do is go through those questions. Would you like a preface of what I talked about a very brief preface to this of what we talked about in the report?
Sure.
So
Sure.
in the report, which I think you probably have seen that. I know it's a document, and it's a 3-page document. I will not admit to being a writer. I will admit that I know some stuff about school buses and operating in a school district. For those of you that haven't met me before, I work in Roseville School District. I retired 6 years ago, and I'm still working part-time there as transportation coordinator, which means I started in 1975. I've done it for a long time, and I also started working with the Department of Education as a consultant in the early 1980s, and I've consulted with many school districts on issues. Never are they the same, and this one may be as complex as anyone I've worked on because it comes with 2 strong issues and some varying thoughts about those issues. So it's a good idea to have questions. It's a good idea to have some answers, and hopefully we can provide them to you. Can I share the screen and what I would propose, by the way, is when I went through the questions, there were questions from each person, and many of them were similar. So I grouped them into different groups, and what I would propose to do is go through the questions in a group, and you'll see the groups when we get the screen up on there, and I'll bring it up. John, am I good to do that?
You should be good to go.
And I'm just going to quick interrupt. Mike, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. Jan, you started off by saying there were 2 strong issues, did you say?
Yes.
Would you tell us what those are?
I'm sorry, I kind of lost my track there. Very simply, the one is the quotations and the response to the quotations. And the second one is what to do about a terminal and the terminal.
Okay, thank you.
They're easy to say at this level, but there's a lot of sentences we're going to go through before we get done answering those questions. And my hope here is that I could be the person in this. I don't have any dog in this show. I'm the guy that's come from the outside, and what my goal is to have you guys ready to bring kids to school safely from the best possible place for those buses to be, given the different impediments that are coming in that direction. Here we go. So these are the questions, and I'm going to scroll down very quickly, and you can see that there are different colors with different people. And off to the left, I put subject areas, and I'll filter out just the questions that I called admin. And I was looking at them again this afternoon, and I thought a couple of these could have gone into some other areas, but I didn't do that. So they'll still work just like it is. But what I would propose to do is respond to these. I can't see the members. So if you need to interrupt with a question, please, you can raise your hand, and Chair, if you wouldn't mind telling me, or somebody needs to talk, I'd be glad to do that. Does that make sense?
That makes sense, except I think I've lost my whole screen too, so I can only see about 4 people, and I'm not sure if there's a way for me to change that. But if people have questions while Jan is doing his presentation, I think we might just have to jump in because I can't see you.
The other option is you can do the chat thing on the side. If you do it not full screen, and a chat thing on the side, you could type a question on the chat. I might not see it because I'm staying full screen. I want to try and see this stuff. But do you think
Okay.
that might work? And otherwise, if somebody wants to ask a question, I'm absolutely comfortable listening to that. I'll listen for somebody's. So some of the questions, first of all, I said should be, they really are not related to contracting, not related to, but and in some ways they are, but they're questions like, what's going to happen with distance learning, and what if it changes transportation? And these transportation contracts, and this is true of all school districts, are really not based on, oh, we guaranteed we're going to have 4 years of 77,000. They're based on somebody got something. Do we know what that static is?
Well, that was a good report, Jan. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyway, so in distance learning, in all of these other questions that relate to what's going to happen if things change because of that, well, the contracts can change on an annual basis. And actually the way your contracts are billed, they change on a monthly basis depending on what the usage is. And so as we go into what's going to happen in the future, the contracts can flex in terms of their costs to the district. Now, the price of a bus will be the agreed price, but if it's only 70 buses instead of 77, then the price goes down. I don't know why this is different from other RFPs. I did ask that question, and it was said that the answer I got was that it was discussed in a January board discussion. Nobody asked to see that at that time, and this is kind of the way it has been in the past. This is what I heard. That's the way practice has been with transportation quotes and contracting process. And the administration said that they would have provided this if it had been requested at that time.
Can I address that?
Please.
It's Nina. I would just like to say that it was a finance working group meeting. That meeting, they were not presented. Actually, it came in on a recommendation verbatim, and we went off of information that was shared to us that we have later found out wasn't actually accurate data as we've kind of gone through this process. And if the information we received during that meeting would have been accurate, I believe it would have had a different direction or a different outcome at that meeting.
I hear you.
And can I say something also? I'm sorry, I had my hand up.
Yeah, go ahead.
We did ask where the RFPs were, and we weren't told until the next February meeting. Oh, they're right outside, but we were told we couldn't take them home. There was only one copy of each. So just to make that clear, they were not, we did ask for them, and we had to stay and look at them at Central Services. We weren't allowed to take them with.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The next question is, what district accounting fund is rental income assigned to? And this relates to the terminal being rented by the vendor, the busing company. And that's a general fund. It comes in for general fund. So it's classroom available money. I have a pros and cons sheet. I'll show you briefly. It is the tab at the bottom. I think you have these documents at home. And I put together the pros and cons that I have heard as I've been talking here, and some that I knew. And we can go through that at the end, but I'll mention it again a few times. Is that workable for everybody?
Yep.
Thank you. What's going to happen if the number of students change? I understand that demographic studies are undertaken, and there's actually one going on right now. But since busage usage is the same question, same answer, really, if it changes, their contract will adjust. And the answer for number 40 is the same, 41 is the same as 40.
Thank you. That helps when you give the number to make sure we're on the right space. So thank you.
Yeah, and you see the numbers are the numbers I arbitrarily assigned off to the side. Now, there are numbers that some people put on their their questions, like on number 23, you see it says 2. That's a number of the line. I'm just gonna say that's part of the question, and so it's a different thing. And 42A and 42, same thing again, usage of buses. And then 42A was saying, well, what about different schools? Well, it's the same, just based on the need. Question number 48, what impact will the pandemic have on all the above? A great unknown, really, but I think we're all going to kind of go through this together. The one thing that the district does control in the pandemic is who does their bus service. And as I will say, this will be a recurring theme, but if you have the current vendor who knows the district, who's been there for 12 years and been providing that service, they're going to be, their learning curve at the start of the year will be much better than a company that comes in with brand new dispatchers, brand new leadership. Many drivers will come across, but not all of them. And so it's an advantage always if you can keep consistency in school busing, because consistency is historical knowledge that's useful.
Can I ask a question, Jan? It's Tina.
Sure.
How does that compare to the fact that we go out for RFPs every 4 years or so, and it could be a new company coming in every 4 years regardless?
Well, there's other pieces of it that are necessary. School districts generally often go out every 4 years. And one of the things that does is it keeps the situation competitive. And you want to be competitive because a vendor that knows that they're going to be there next year and doesn't already have a price agreed to, they have the opportunity to, should we say, raise the prices. And what you need is some market pressure to keep prices down. That's why most districts go out for quotes or bids every 4 years. And that's generally what the law talks about, is a 2+2 contract.
I was just curious of how that, though, impacted the stay with the same versus going out for new vendors and new people coming in.
Yeah, there is another piece to that. And that's, when I started many years ago, we changed vendors about 4 times, and over about a period of 20 years. And we had those learning curves, saw some of those things happen, but I also recognized that, I remember the first time we had the incumbents coming in for bids, and they came into the back room and they said, well, here's what we're going to do. And he was telling me all those other stuff. And then we went into the bid room and we put in the bids, and this is when the contract was about $1.5 million. They were $250,000 out of the lead. All of a sudden, it didn't matter what they were going to do, because $250,000 out of the classroom into the classroom is a big deal. And that was when we changed. So if there's enough money on the table, those changes are worth it. If there's not enough money on the table, if for instance, you had a tie bid between the incumbent and a new vendor coming in, you'd always want to go, at least I would always want to go with the incumbent who knows what's going on, who has plans like that guy did, except his plans were good up to the point of his quote. And then his plans weren't so good. And I felt badly for him. He was a guy I like. I like, contractors are generally good people and do good things. And sometimes changes like that have to occur.
Thank you.
That's number 48. I think we have about 50 questions. I'm going to kind of go to the contract, and then I'm going to go to vendors, and then we can come back to real estate and terminal. So we'll go through the contract stuff first. How long is a proposed contract? Are there advantages over a multi-year contract? I can tell you, I've talked to each of the 3 vendors who are still in here again, twice. Every one of them likes a 4-year contract. They bid a 4-year contract, or quoted a 4-year contract, because they can then allocate over it the costs that they have to do startup. Even the incumbent vendor was going to make a major investment in new buses as a part of his commitment to upgrading his fleet. And that has some other effects that we'll talk about, but that's why a 4-year contract allows for them to kind of write off, depreciate those kind of upfront costs that might occur. And also they can just, put across all of that. But then also the 4-year contract gives you 3 years where you're not going to be changing vendors. So that's an important part of it too. Make sense? Silence is golden. I'll go with that's what Dr. Tyne always says to me. He says, silence is golden. If I hear silence, I'll keep on moving.
A question I have,
Sir.
and that is, you've talked about why it's an advantage for a 4-year contractor to have a 4-year contract.
Yep.
From a district point of view, is it the same advantage or is there something different there?
Generally, a 4-year contract will get you better prices because they can write off just the same kind. It's the other side of the same exact coin, and more competitive prices means lower costs. And I think we can actually see this kind of in the way these quotes came in. We'll look at those anytime you want to. But so the 4-year cost, 4-year quote is usually a lower price than if you said, well, you're going to do it for 1 year. And the guy says, well, I'm going to get buses. I'm going to bring them in here. I'm going to hire all these people. A bunch of them aren't going to want to come if they know it's only a 1-year job. But if I can tell them it's 4 years, this is actually what was said to me by the incumbent when he was talking about a 4-year versus a 1-year contract. Okay, is that answer to?
Jan, I lost the sound while you were talking, maybe the last minute or two.
Oh, okay.
The only part I heard was, does that answer your question?
I like it.
That was the best part.
So going back and saying it again, the 4-year contract gives them an opportunity to have to depreciate off those costs over the 4 years rather. So in other words, let's look at the incumbent who says he's buying new buses. Well, he knows those buses are going to be revenue producers for the next 4 years. So he can write them off in 4 years rather than saying, well, it's a 1-year contract. If I bring in new buses, I've only got 1 year of depreciation. I'm going to do it. So I'm going to need to take that risk and monetize it. Are you still hearing me?
Yes.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
And so anyway, that's what it lowers prices. It allows for a competitive situation to occur in the district every 4 years. And that's what keeps your prices in line with the current market prices. There's other ways to do it too. One of them is to know what everybody else is doing and negotiate further with your contractor. And and one of the things that we have out there actually is a survey that's done by multiple school districts that put up a price numbers for each district contract. And when you've got that, you can look and see, well, this is what Anoka Hennepin's doing. This is what Minnetonka is doing. This is what Minneapolis or what St. Paul is doing. Then you can get an idea of what are the market prices, and you can negotiate with your vendor to make sure that the prices you want are what you get. Because a vendor will always want to be committed for the next year rather than let it go out. And then, if he says, well, I got to have more money than that. You say, okay, we're going to go out for bid. They'll say, well, wait a minute. You mean if I take this price, you'll let me have it? And if I want to go higher than that, we're going to go to bid. I said, that'll happen. And they said, well, we'd rather have the bird in the hand than two in the bush. Not exactly. I didn't make that one up. I think I got that from someplace. I don't know.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. If we were certain that the current terminal would be permanently available to us, would there be a clear transportation provider recommendation to the board? At any moment, the incumbent is always the best to have if everything else was equal. And but that wouldn't matter if it was certain or not certain about the terminal. And in fact, we are very uncertain on the terminal. So this question may not even, it may have relevance and it may not, but it would be in the best interest, especially if you go through other changes, what I call churn in another part in my report. And I got, Dr. Tyne gave me a little heat about using churn in a school transportation context, I think. But, the more things that are changing, the riskier it is. And we don't like risk in school buses. We don't like risk when we're taking kids places. We want the drivers to know where they're going. We want them to have done it before. So would the bidded costs change if the site is the Stagecoach property instead of the LE terminal? You notice that and if you haven't, we'll talk about it later, but the costs will change if there are added lease costs. The way the school district does it, it's a pass-through. It was a pass-through when you leased from Stagecoach before. Since the prices would change from what was publicized in the RFP, then there would be the vendor would need to have the opportunity to say, well, I've got to be able to recoup my costs. So then they would raise their costs. So let's just say it was $360,000 a year as opposed to $225,000. Revenue is $360,000 of paying for this lease. You know, the difference to the district's revenues is then $370,000. That's a pretty big change. And we'll talk about, I've got had it, you know, as you may know, I've talked to the vendor early on that owns Stagecoach, and recently talked to him again, and we've actually are moving in the direction of getting a price from him, and the price has dropped down to $30,000 a month in his latest version, which is good. You know, maybe I should talk to him one more time and get him to 20, huh?
Can I ask a question there, Jan?
Sure enough.
That was one of the questions that I had, because looking at the question and answer session, several of them, it says 30,000, but then number 8 says the owner has recently stated a cost of 15,000 per month with a credit of 10,000 per month.
That was for just holding it, Liz. Sorry.
Okay.
That's just to put, and I don't know that's Tony is the guy now talking to him. I got him down the list of started to talk about this, and I got kind of another price from him, but I told him I'm not a district employee or official, so I passed it back over to Dr. Tyne, who gave it to Tony, and Tony has had contact with him, and I believe that we're in the process of getting down that road, not to the sense of signing anything until we know we need to, but moving down that road.
Just so you know too, that Tony is an emissary, and that puts a little cushion between me and that vendor. And I want to take time I want to make sure we know where we're going before I make any recommendation to the board or the district on that piece of property or how it would be used. I feel very uncomfortable putting money on the table and getting nothing for it, supposedly nothing for it. So I'm cautious. Let's put it that way.
Good.
Okay. What are the costs for early termination of a contract? If it's for cause, there are no costs. The contract is not yet signed, so there is no contract at this point from 2020 to 24. And since you are in a quotation format, you have negotiations possible for changing the term of the contract. That also gives the vendor, he says, well, if he could say, if the term of the contract goes down to 1 year, then I got to get my upfront costs out in that first year. So he's going to change prices too. And I say he this time because it is all guys that I'm talking to. Normally I would not say he.
No offense taken.
Thank you. So the impact of fuel costs, I think you guys should buy all the fuel you can right now at minus $30 a barrel. And geez, you know, get free gas forever.
Have you got a place we can store it?
My house. We only have a few small machines.
Could we find just a Ford Escalade? You know, they've got big gas tanks. So actually, your district has an excellent fuel escalation clause because it's got a price range from $2.75 to $3.75. And above and below those numbers, the bottom range and the top range, if the price falls below the range, the district receives half of the refund of half of the fuel costs, and half above the range. When it goes above the range, then the district reimburses an additional half of the fuel cost. So you can win when it's low, which it's never been low. I mean, this was, I thought, if you'd have talked to me about this clause last year, I'd have said, well, that side of it is useless. But no, that side came into being for the first time ever in an unbelievable year.
Jan, do you think he'll ever try to change that number, that?
275, 375.
Yeah.
It's all, all of these things are subject to negotiation, but
Okay.
a contract, the proposals were put in with this range and the district chose it. And it would be something that the district would then look at and say, well, you could, you may need to give us a better price if you want to have the range, for instance, escalate up because fuel's going up.
Yep.
The real deal here is to try and minimize. You want to minimize the risk for the contractor because they want to know what their costs are going to be. And then when they do their bids, they don't have to put in a fudge factor because their fuel prices might go up too high. So this is what this escalation clause is really there to keep prices of buses low, as low as they can. And that, when you're in a bidding process or a quoting process, they're looking for where they can, carve it tight because they want to get the quote. And so, when you give them, every time you take away risk, you increase the precision with which they can predict their costs. And that means the bid can be tighter than it would be otherwise. The initial direction was made from incorrect information. We talked about that briefly. At the time, we're told it was 600,000 with $1 million over 4 years. We are now, after that, the summary sheet here, this is the latest differential. This is again in the document that you have. And you could see that the Minnesota Central in this is 35 million for 4 years. NPN is 36 million. And Minnesota Coaches, also known as Monarch, is at 39 million. And the differential there is over 4 years, 600,000 or 4 million. And if you look down to the first 2 years, the differential is 400,000 or 1.8 million.
I have a question, Jan.
Yes.
Can you explain why we aren't using what you used in the finance meeting with the actual RFP numbers? Because those are the ones that everybody had the same information to bid on.
Well, I could have put that in there, but I felt like it was, and it is much closer, but it wasn't.
It is much closer.
It was not as complete of a picture of the actual usage. And this was, I asked the question of Ben and in the transportation office, why didn't you just use what you had at the back of the RFP? And he said, well, that really wasn't our usage. Basically, that was just, a very slim and let me.
So when we initially talked, we talked about the fact that they have summer in there and then they have kind of extracurricular. And you said at that time that you don't really go by that because it fluctuates every year during the summer. It's not really a consistent amount. So you go by the regular year.
I don't think I said that because in my own evaluations of our contract, I always try to put in all of the basis for costs that we have that, and it goes on, the other parts that were added in and just going over and taking a look at it here. This is the cost for 2021 and you can see it's a formula. And then there's another formula down here at the bottom, and the cost for 2 years is the sum of this number and this number, and go down to the bottom, this field trips number. And so what it's saying is, what are you doing for field trips? What are you doing for regular school? And what are you doing for summer school? And what are you doing for the special ed bus equipment as well? And by putting all of those things in, you get a much better valuation of what's actually going to be the contract. And that's what Ben told me they were doing. I questioned him on a couple of the pieces. One of them was they were doing it as a 6-hour rate. They were adding 30 minutes to or 60 minutes to the cost of the regular runs. And in fact, they're running about 5-hour rates and maybe some 5.5-hour rates. So we agreed, and I moved it back to 5.5-hour rates to get to.
See, now, I kind of struggle with that because that I don't think is a fair ability or a fair quoting process to the other companies when you look at your end results, because they didn't have that same opportunity or that same option to offer rates at those different values. They were not aware of them.
No, they weren't. And but I think if you take a look at even that lowest rate, the RFP numbers, those rates, even then, it was only $200,000 difference over 6 years, but it still was different in favor of the incumbent.
Yeah, I have even between Mid Central and MTN, we were looking at 81,000 or 81.6. So, I mean, it was, I'm struggling with the fact that this is what we're going on with the data. And if the data was, honest on the upfront, when we had our January meeting, it would have had an absolutely different direction. And we are still back to that data. So I'm a little frustrated.
I hear that. As a transportation guy, I came in, looked at what I thought was the best way for a district to look at what is going to be the operational, what's going to most approximate the operational costs. And I think that as a district, you want to be the most informed about the real costs that are going to occur, because those are your budgets.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. But I think that information should have been given to all applicants, not just one had that information.
Well,
that's where I struggle.
I hear you. And certainly that may be what changes some of your thoughts. I will have one other thing about it, and that is that the district can choose however it wants to make its decision, and they make it on the basis of a variety of things. And by putting in the original, the one that was part of the written tabulation form, which is the last page of the RFP, I did it that way. I did it the other way. That was the original bids, and then this was the one where they negotiated with the incumbent vendor, and he made about a $200,000 change in prices, I think it was, over the last 2 years to change prices, because that's what you can do when you're in a quote situation.
Correct. Can I just say one more thing? This for me is it's a really hard point for me, or really just with the way that the processes have been. I just want to make sure we're doing our diligence here, and that when we initially met in January, it is not just standard process or standard practice for this district to only negotiate with the bottom vendor or the lowest vendor. In the past, they've negotiated, and we've talked about this at that meeting, you could negotiate with the bottom how many. And so I personally am a little frustrated because we weren't allowed to negotiate, or were persuaded not to negotiate with anything other than the lowest, which was at that time a $600,000 difference, million over 4 years. That was the information we were going on.
Yep, and I appreciate your help for me, because when I did my first cost evaluation myself of this, you pointed out an area where I had not seen something, and it helped me get back on a more accurate track. So I know that you've been doing your homework here. I appreciate that you did a little help for me too. And so that's what we have. And so how it colors what you're working on, I accept that.
Thank you.
I don't know what else to say to you.
Jen, can you put a fence around that for me and explain the difference between the two? I hear what Tina's saying, and I hear what you're saying, and it sounds like it's not apples and apples. Is that right?
Correct.
Well,
and so
yes.
Can you give me apples and apples?
The written tabulation form was very much abbreviated. It only had the regular ed transportation, special ed transportation, and midday routes, and that was it.
And that's the form that the board saw?
Correct.
I did put that out for the and I think all of the board got it eventually, but I did put it out on the original report I had to show the difference between what things looked like then and what had also been done by the transportation and business department to have a more complete thing. And then when we got done working with the more complete evaluation, there were some, you know, when it got opened up, there were some areas there were a couple of formula issues and things like
Yeah,
that. which
yeah,
needed
I
to-
understand that. But if you put it and make it apples and apples, what's the bottom line? What's it at the end of the day when we write the check?
Well, the apples and apples, you know, let's just say we've got some Macintosh and we got some Jonathans and we got
No,
So you would,
go ahead.
you, in my perspective, you would really just have to go ask each company
Yeah.
what they would, that's why I suggest we go back and ask each company, because they haven't had the opportunity to offer the same information as the lowest bidder.
Well, they all turned in those prices and their prices were, you know,
According to the RFP,
according to the RFP. By the way, I wanted to mention one thing. There were 6 vendors who quoted, but one of them only
Yeah.
made a partial quote. That was non-compliant and was never actually considered. And after talking, and I talked to all 5 of the other vendors, 2 of them, First Student and Craft Bus Company, are both out of town providers, and they were both said this was awfully late for us to pull together a full terminal and everything, even if the terminal is there. And they backed out and said, we would like you to do a 1-year quote or contract and then come back next year and let us go at it again when we have everything else kind of in place. So just I had put that in my other report, and I just want to make sure you heard it as well.
Can I just ask a quick question, Dan?
Please.
So at this point, since we don't have a way to compare apples to apples, how long would it take, talking to the other 2 companies who still are available, to get their apples to apples quotes?
Well, I believe you do have an apples to apples comparison based on the money they put in. But if you went back out for more to get them to redo their quotes, which is what I've heard that's on some agendas. And the way I would go, I think, is we would put the same form back out and say we were going to evaluate it in a different way. And then I think it would take at least a week, probably 2 weeks for them to submit, another week of evaluation or so, and then however long it takes to get to a school board meeting. And that puts it, I think it's going to be a month before it's a done deal. And that is already pressure. We already are under pressure for them to order buses that they, especially the incumbent, to have, get buses that are coming in. And I know MTN also does not have buses at this time, so they would need to be arranging their thing. By the way, I talked to both of them and said that it may come down to this kind of a situation. And they're both, of course, how could you say not, very interested in that. So that is, and when I talked to our incumbent vendor, well, likewise, he said, well, we were pretty sharp with our pencil and gave a pretty good price. And I said, I know you're the lowest price up there, but there's questions and concerns. So
About a month.
I believe it would be a month before you would get, whatever line you're on now for a decision, it would add another month to that. And that month is a tough month because usually they like 6 months of order time to get new buses made. And we're not going to be on a 6-month thing right now. I think we're more like on a 4-month timeline. And I don't think that bus companies are actually producing buses right now. So they're going to be a backlog. We'll just have to see how that goes. But this is going to add complexity to that.
And I know that the board chair had asked this to be done in February, and I think the treasurer had asked this to be done in February, but maybe now it'll actually be to our advantage that it wasn't done because so many things have changed, and maybe we'll be able to get more favorable bids with the cost of transport, with cost of gas being lower.
It could happen. I can't say it will and I can't say it won't. The uncertainty, like I talked about before, vendors, but bus companies do not like uncertainty. And, and how does that usually translate? It usually translates up, but it could go down because this year is like no other year I've ever experienced, or nor you guys. I know we're all in the.
Jen, would this be a quote or I mean, could you negotiate, or would this be
It'd be negotiation.
a negotiation?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a loaded question then. If you go out for that period of time and it's a negotiation, where does the advantage lie? Not with us, but with the vendor. Which vendor has an advantage, would you say?
I don't know. You could say the lowest vendor has the advantage because he doesn't have but he also may have already gone to the bone. The other vendors are hungry, might want to come in, and as I worry, they might come in at underprice or more risky price, which turns out to be an underprice if in fact it's as hard to get drivers as it was. It doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. We're going to have unemployment. But
yeah.
We also won't have so this is not something I have experience to tell you that I have a solid answer on.
Yeah.
That sounds familiar. Sign of the times.
I know the times.
So
there's one other thing. Now I remember I had it and now it's kind of slipped from my mind, but it'll come back and I'll remember it in a while.
okay.
Question, please.
Yes.
Am I on?
You're on.
Okay. Jan, the question I have is this, and it really goes back to that fuel escalation clause. And as I look at that, does that carry over regardless of who the vendor is? That's an expectation of ours?
That was in the RFP. It is part
Okay.
of the specifications under which the contract is signed.
Because what I'm looking at, and I read a lot of economic forecasting, et cetera, but especially when you're starting to talk about fuel prices, there's a couple of big ingredients there. What's going on with the Saudis and the Russians and the Americans in terms of supply is a big one. But then also what's related to is COVID. And my point is what may happen may, and this is, I think I'm asking you for your perspective as well. In the short run, prices may decrease drastically like they have. But if on the other hand, a number of suppliers are driven out of the business, particularly in Canada, the Dakotas, Texas, et cetera, because their production costs are so much higher that they might belly up, or a significant part may belly up, and prices might go speedily in the opposite direction. So it seems to me if you're predicting the future, things are just going to be very volatile. And
No
so
argument.
that clause is extremely important.
And it is. And, we put that clause in. I remember when we first did it, I started working in 1975 and we had no fuel car issues. And I think diesel fuel was like 25 cents a gallon. And then it got up to 75 cents and we thought, my God, how can we live with this? And, and bus companies were saying, we're going to go broke. And so we started doing fuel escalation clauses where we would say that, up to $3 or $2. Actually, we started out with saying $1 and then we went to $1.25, $1.50 and $2. And right now, in Roseville, we're at $2 and $4. And with all of that being said, above $4, we took the risk on in our school district because we wanted them to have that as their absolute cap for what they were going to pay for gas. We never got to $4 on it. We also averaged our fuel over the course of the year. So if we got low early, high late, it averaged out, then we usually didn't have to pay for it. And I haven't looked at the specs that way, but because I think that they just are done on a monthly basis. So you get some, maybe, and then you get some back, maybe. This is a very good clause that you have, though, because it protects on both ends. It protects.
I would agree.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jan, this is Mark Burns. Can I ask a question?
Sure, please.
Thanks. So you were describing here just a few minutes ago about the different, we're talking about apples to apples, apples to oranges.
Yeah.
Could you maybe just walk through, because I'm not sure that every board member is quite up to speed as much as the finance working group, as well as for the public. My understanding is that the district went out, had an RFP and or requested these proposals, and several of them came back in with information, with data, and that data we have available to us, and that tells some information. If you could walk through what the response to the RFP was, and then what is the challenge? What is the question that some board members have about what the responses to those RFPs were, and why there's a concern about the data that we're using to try to make a decision?
As best as I can explain it, I put back up on the screen the 21-22 prices and the 22 and negotiated prices. So what you have here, and tell me if I'm getting at what you're asking. But so if we look across the top line here, I'll just highlight this line. You can see that there's a price of 347, 354, 398, 386, 387. And then the current price of the contract this year is at 317. And that increase reflects basically a market change, because essentially the 317 is 4 years ago prices in the rest of the school bus industry. Right now over in Anoka Hennepin, their rates for this year are somewhere around $390. St. Paul School District is paying over $400 for 5 hours. And so anyway, when you look at these rates, each of these companies brought in rates, a rate for a quarter hour and additional, and then the 5 hour. And we did a 5.5 hour cost, and you can see here it's 365, 393 for 4.5. But really, the standard rate that's evaluated is the 347. And you can also see that there was a midday cost. There's a special ed rate. And then these are evaluated according to 77 5-hour regular routes per day. And that's what is this 28,000. So that's, if you look at what that is, we do this like this, you can see it's that 5.5 hour rate times 77 buses. And that's true of all of these across, so that they're apples to apples comparison from the different vendors. And down in the bottom, the next is the rate for 21-22, and it's the same kind of a deal, the same kind of a spreadsheet. The one thing that was different is that the MTN bid this rate, a 4 hour rate for special ed, at the same, and they said, and that's the same rate that we'll bid for the 5 hour rate. So their 5 hour rate in special ed is lower than the regular rate here. And so, it's an apples to apples comparison, because that's what they said the 5.5 hour or 4.5 hour rate would be. And that's what we put in there, which is different than the others, because the others all said this is a 4 hour rate plus $15 and it goes up to 377. That kind of a difference all the way across.
So the chart that you're showing on your screen, that is, we didn't input that information or negotiate that. These are the numbers that came back in the RFP. Is that correct?
That's correct. Except in the second year, the district went to Minnesota Central and asked them to change the prices for the 23-24 season. So Minnesota Central's prices in the 23-24 season are lower. They submitted another price sheet with lower prices. We are, let me look at it here. I think it was received. I say we, I wasn't here, so I didn't receive it, but I've got a copy of it, and I believe it was received on February 5th. And then those prices were inputted. So when I did the evaluations, I did three of these different summary. On the summary sheet, I had three different totals. I had the RFP total, and I had the submitted total, and then I had the negotiated total. In the end, the one that's most accurate, the one that is the actual final prices that we got from Minnesota Central, plus everybody else is all the same prices. Does that make some sense?
Mostly. Can you just repeat this last part when you're saying the most accurate pricing? Does that represent pricing after negotiation with only Minnesota Central, or is this what Minnesota Central supplied in its original response to its RFP?
This is the after the negotiations with Minnesota Central. And you can see down in my tab, I named it 2021 and 21-22 NEG for negotiated.
Okay. But the original spreadsheet that you were showing, I mean, it may be, Tina, maybe you can explain the original, the one, the RFP responses. What is not an apples to apples comparison on that, on the RFP response?
Well, Tina, do you want to answer that?
So when I initially I asked Kristen for her initial spreadsheet because I wanted to understand her numbers, I started entering them in myself to try to figure out what her numbers were. She had taken, or the department had taken, I'm not sure who was responsible, and broke everything down and added extra hours per. Like if they bid for 4 hours or 5 hours, then the RFP or the spreadsheet showed 6 hours at the extra rate. And then some of it was 40 hours, 41 hours, but Mid-Central put in 31 hours and then charged a lower rate. And so everything was a little skewed. And I know Jan remembers the conversation differently than I did, but initially when we go back in and you were talking about, I think part of the biggest difference is in summer and I don't even know if we talked about special ed. I think we just talked about summer, but those prices are a bigger difference. But those things weren't asked for in the RFP. So the RFP asked for things like your regular education routes at 5-hour rates, your 25 additional quarter hours and what that rate is, 41 special ed routes, 20 additional quarter hours. That was very specifically laid out the RFP. And so not every company was able to provide the same information back to be input.
Okay. How do we have that information in the spreadsheet? We've got the summer transportation, the field trip information for each one of the vendors. Where does that information come from? Those data points?
It was actually submitted. The quote document had buckets for each one of those prices. They just said we're going to evaluate it based on only these three things. You know, regular education routes, additional time, special education routes, additional time, and midday routes, additional time. They didn't say we're going to use all of the other or many of the other things to reevaluate.
Wait, can I ask a question? When you say they, Jan, who do you mean? Is it the transportation companies or the district?
Well, the transportation companies submitted, but I think maybe my they there was meant the school district when it put out the RFP, it said, and I'll use it as the monolithic school district. It said that we will evaluate based on this written tabulation form, which was next to the last page of the RFP. And then they didn't. When I first got here, they hadn't done that, and it took me a while to ask the question and finally get a hold of Ben to talk to him about what had happened. And he said, well, we used the same form we used the last time we went out for quotes, and I just updated it to current usage, and that's what we used. And he submitted that form to Kristen, who, as I understand it, she put the numbers into the format that it was. Ben was responsible for setting up the form. Kristen put in the numbers.
I don't know, Mark, if this answers your question, but I think what the difference is with Minnesota Central, they had the opportunity to negotiate, and I think their prices ended up looking a little more favorable, but the other two that are still interested have not had the opportunity yet. Is that what you were asking?
Well, partially, but I think that if I'm looking at the screen that Jan has up right now, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that those numbers are pre-negotiation.
All, except
Mid-Central.
Min Central, yes. Min Central, these numbers were negotiated.
And Min-Central and MTN were actually closer than we initially thought in price.
Or even negotiating with MTN.
Yes.
So can I just clarify to make sure I understand, Jan, to what you were saying earlier? The RFP we're going to evaluate on these items, but
Yes.
because Min Central included additional items, we then evaluated them on the additional items instead of only on what we said we were going to evaluate on. Is that correct?
No, that pushes it a little bit in the direction of it was done in favor of Minnesota Central. It wasn't. It was that this is the usage of our contract, and we're gonna bring some more information in to evaluate on, so that we have a more accurate evaluation. That's when I asked Ben why didn't you just do that? He said because we wanted to do current usage, as opposed to. And I said, it would have been nice. And he said, well, I never saw the RFP, so I didn't know what was in there anyway. And I think that probably was, the RFP was a redo from previous years, and it worked well. And, you know, it just kind of slipped because it was in the back of the RFP. You know, it's just a thing at the very end. And so, you know, when you're reading, you go down through the pieces and you look at what are we doing today? And you update all of those things in the front of an RFP. But when you get to the back, it's kind of like, well, that's mostly boilerplate language where they get to tell you who their references are, or any other, there's an opportunity for them to make any other proposals that they want to make.
Thank you.
Would one way to have an apples to apples comparison of these vendors who responded to the RFP simply to put the numbers back into for Minnesota Central, which were the pre-negotiated numbers?
I actually ran a spreadsheet. I have a spreadsheet that's on that as well. And it ends up, you know, it's the current usage one. And it was a $400,000 difference.
Over 4 years.
Over 4 years.
So about 100,000 a year.
$437,560. You know, I can see if I can open this up so that you can see it. If it doesn't change, then I'll have to go back in and do a reshare, but let me give it a try. Pardon me if you're seeing.
Looks clean to me.
No family photos, please. Is that it?
Oh, that's not it.
I didn't think so.
I got the wrong one. I was right next to it though. You know, I got so close. So here's the summary sheet. Come on now. You know, I changed, I'll try one more time, and then I'm going to say that I don't have it because I think when I went to change it to just put in the negotiated ones, I must have lost the rest of them, but we'll try it one more time and see if I.
Likely story.
Probably updated.
Yeah, it has auto update on it, which, you know, that's really good until it's not. Let's try this one. Nope, that's just the negotiated one. I'm sorry. I'm going to not be able to show you, but
So Jan, let me run this by you while you're thinking about that a little bit. So after the negotiation, the difference between the low vendor and the next in line was $400,000 over 4 years, or about $100,000. Before they negotiated, how close was it?
It was, well, before.
Or that was before they negotiated.
Yeah, the 437,560 was before negotiation.
After negotiation, what was it?
Six.
Six something, right?
Oh, you
About
know
a
what? Here you go.
Here you go.
Here you go. See, it's got you go from line 2 to line 15. It's because the other ones are just hiding in there. So now you can see that this is the 437,560. This is the 605,693, which is the same as the other one that's in your document.
I'm not sure. Are we looking at the same thing you're referencing?
I don't think so either.
Okay, see, that's what I was afraid of. I'm going to stop share and start share again.
Oh, there's everybody.
Hey, nobody left.
Yeah, don't let them get on your picture. You'll disappear.
Okay, what about that one? Does that show there's the RFP format results?
Yeah, RFP format results.
The total quote current use?
Whoa, the difference between Minnesota Central and MTN is $100,000 over.
Yeah, in the second year, MTN's special ed costs were flat, and Minnesota Central had an increase, and that's why in the second year, Minnesota Central is MTN is lower than Minnesota Central. So their RFP is 123 difference, and then for the total quotes, it's 437, and for the total negotiated. And then I just on the chance you wanted to know about Monarch / Minnesota coaches, they're out there in the $1 million range. Is that somebody's dog? Is it time to feed him?
We have too many random people running around out here.
Must be a big boardroom.
So this is a summation, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but of pre-negotiation, as far as we can tell, an apples to apples comparison among these three responders. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the apples to apples that you're talking about is number one, all these numbers are unnegotiated, all they are the submitted numbers that each of them vendors put in. And the total quotes current use is that one. And then post negotiation, you can see that these guys dropped some and got it 100, 605. It's just 180,000 more or something like that. 170,000 more, less.
Okay.
That good?
Could I,
Yes.
Jan, could I just intervene for a second? If
Sure,
you could
yeah.
stay on the screen.
Yep.
In general, my interpretation of the meeting was a little bit different. I quite a bit different. I had thought that we were given the go ahead and negotiate with Minnesota Central. And it wasn't just the financial implication. The discussion was also kind of revolving around the idea that we have this relationship with them. And this was one thing that I remember asking specifically. I actually had thought that we had some issues with Min Central. That's my interpretation of that discussion, and was told that no, there have been glitches here and there, like you would in any setting, but the relationship was really progressing, and given the fact that they really knew our district, that was a huge positive, kind of a selling point, if you will. So I personally was taking that into consideration as well. But I guess for me, a lot of numbers here, and for the purpose of the public, Jan, could you just, given the previous conversation about apples to apples and whatnot, would you say that this current slide we're looking at is the closest we can get to comparing the various groups amongst each other. Would you say this slide is the most accurate?
Well, my belief was the most accurate one was the one that I put up
Okay.
and gave to your document. And the reason it's the most accurate is because it's the final costs that were negotiated.
Okay.
And, you know, I recognize that some believe that negotiation should have occurred with multiple vendors, but this is a practice that's often done in other districts, and both ways. And usually though, it's both ways from the get-go, and yeah, or it's one way from the get-go. And it all really depends on just what is the district's preference on that. It's so this particular web page or worksheet shows 3 different ways of looking at it. The first one is the one that came out with the RFP. And it's, you know, you can look at it and it's about $4 million less or $5 million less than the other 2 in terms of costs that it's talking about. And those other costs are relevant. They were the costs, those were the prices that were submitted on the RFP day. And everybody submitted, filled out the same form, filled out all the buckets in the form, except for the one vendor who wasn't considered. And so, you know, either any one of these is an apples to apples comparison between the money that they each put on the table. Every one of them tells the story a little differently. And the one at the bottom is the one that's closest to what is actually going to occur in terms of if they did contract.
Thank you.
Yeah, like I said, I still take issue with the data that's in front of us, and you and I will always probably never agree on that. But okay, I can handle it too. Just because Mid Central was able to provide more insightful information than the other companies were going forward, they're familiar with what the previous process or what the previous, you know, things they were looking for are, and they offered more information, and that's what you're seeing on the screen right now, not what the RFP asked.
Well, actually, all of the prices were submitted by all the vendors at the same time. And so you know, that's the way quotes go. There was, you know, the summer school stuff, the special ed stuff, all was a part of the legal submission that was done after the 30-day interval, and when quotes were received in December. And then after, so the numbers are good numbers. Now the question of, well, is it fair to only negotiate with one? It's your district choice.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to I'll keep this up on my computer, but I'm going to go back to the other one so we can go back to questions. Go ahead, Mike.
Jan, the question I have is this, and I'm just trying to sum it. Those original RFPs, that common page that you're still saving there,
Sure.
that all comes December 2019.
Correct.
Okay, and then what you're saying, I think, if I heard you correctly, is that common practice is sometimes then to negotiate with the lowest bidder further.
It's common practice both ways. It's common practice to negotiate with the lowest bidder. Sometimes it's common practice with some districts, just depends on their culture, to negotiate with all of them. That's actually a very dangerous, in my opinion, situation, because you put your vendors, and usually this is done by bringing, and it's usually done in smaller districts, but they'll bring the vendors into the board meeting or into a committee meeting, and they'll say, okay, give us your best price. So they give a best price. The next guy comes up and says, well, I'm going to beat that by, and the next guy, you know, they go reverse auction, and you end up with a very low price for the school district, and you end up with a vendor that may cut corners because he's not going to make money, or she's not going to make money. So the idea of going back and all 3 of them can be dangerous territory, but also if you go back and all 3 of them, and they all are looking at it now and saying there's more risk, they could all raise their prices too. I mean, it's a double-edged sword. You could, you know, somebody's going to be hungry. I mean, You know, we heard from Monarch, they said, what is it going to take for us to win this contract? That sounds pretty hungry. You know, and I don't know. And but if you go back and in the most fair way to do it, if you're going to, would be to go out, tell all of them in their own vacuum to resubmit. Then they come back in and it's not in the reverse auction way. On the other hand, what if one of them just says, well, you know, it's too late and I really am not interested in cutting all the way to the bone, and they may just back out of it. And then somebody else says, well, I'm going to do what I do.
Although it sounded like they all were still interested.
Yeah, they are all interested and they all speak that way. And I haven't, and I, you know, MTN especially, they're not as large as the other vendors. And I had some conversations to kind of let them hear what all was going to be going on in terms of they were going to need to find drivers, buses, all of those things. And at a point in time, and if you did go out for more quotes, I would suggest we also have them submit a plan for how they're going to implement in that course of time, because I think that is going to be maybe as important as money. If you get the closer you get to the start of school and you don't have a vendor and you don't have a place to go, these are risky things. Shall I come back up to the questions? We're moving right through them like a knife through hard butter.
Thank you.
Back to questions.
Nope.
So contract, I don't. Somebody
What
asked,
number?
What number are we on? I think we were on number 20, and I think, Tina, isn't that right? That we were talking about 20?
For a long, long time.
Yes. Well, you know, but the answers that you get are answers that also apply to down the road a little bit. So, you know,
Yeah,
getting a
a
good
lot of
answer
them
the
are
first time doesn't mean you don't have to get an answer the second time. So here's the good one. Number 38. Is it possible to sign a contract for shorter duration? Yes. Any questions? I like that answer. What's the cost of oil 3 or 4 years from now? Mike, I think you had the right prediction. It could do whatever it's going to do. Your fuel clause protects the district both ways. Because of uncertainty, would be better off with a 2-year contract. It's a possibility. Where I would talk about it is you could talk about a 2-year or 4-year contract. You know, they solicited 4 years. So you've got control of 4 years. You could go back and say, we want to have a right of refusal after the first year if things aren't working well. And they might say to you, well, I'll keep my quotes, but if you do right of refusal, will you pay me X dollars or something like that? I don't know what they would do, you know, but I'm just predicting that they could say, yes, I'll give that up, but it might cost you if you in fact do it. And they might throw in something that's compared to what they believe that they've got invested in getting going. And that would be anybody, not just the original vendor, but I think all vendors would, although you never know. Again, it's, you know, they're not my brain, they're their brains as to what they're going to do.
Jan, can I make your number 38 a little more complicated? Sorry.
That was so good.
I know. So I have my opinion on this, but I guess I'd love your advisement or your opinion on 38. What are the pros and cons of that? Are there any pros and cons to that, of signing a contract for shorter duration than 4 years? Is that a factor?
The issue with every contractor is that they're going to have all those upfront costs. You know, they've depreciated their costs over the 4 years. So if they've got new equipment coming in, they've got when they hire people and they said we got a 4-year contract, then those people are more likely to go. So it's easier for them to get good people. You know, all of those things are part of what a 4-year contract does. And every time you shorten it up, you make more uncertainty, more risk. And usually contractors translate that risk into cost. and they say, well, if I'm going to risk something, I'm going to need a little more insurance money, that kind of thing. So the reason that originally you chose a 4-year contract, well, I would believe this, is you want to get that kind of industry standard contract length, which people know. They've been bidding on 4-year contracts in Minnesota forever, and they know that that's going to be a security for that amount of time. And it gives them a chance to get to know the district pretty well, so that when you come back for another 4 years, they're the incumbent, they're doing a good job. If they're not doing a good job, easy to get them out of there. And it's not, it's a funny thing, but we talk about money, but money is not the only thing. The other things are performance and what kind of a job do they do? And I would have got a couple of responses to some of those questions coming up.
Thank you.
Okay. I think actually that kind of just went through number 45 as well. And as assuming let me raise this up a little bit. Oh, I'm down there. And assuming the board majority wants to sell the terminal to Pat Regan and use Monarch, are we obligated to use Monarch? No, you're not obligated. The terminal and the bus contract are two separate items. And in fact, when we get to talk about the terminal, I think that you're going to see how the disconnect is going to happen, because selling the terminal is subject to the laws of property disposal that are on all public entities in Minnesota. I am not a guy that talks about that very much, but I do know you can't. We've got some old school buses in Roseville, our old activity buses, and we can't just go out and put an ad in the paper and sell them. We have to go through a process. And I'm pretty sure that if you've got property, you've got to go through a same process. And that's probably not a 1-minute process. It's probably not a 1-week process. It might not be a 1-month process. It might be longer than that. I don't know. But I would not just count on saying, well, I can sell to Pat and sign a contract with him at the same time. And also at this point, these are two different things we're talking about.
So in other words, you couldn't negotiate with him to say, get the contract and we'll sell you the terminal.
Well, in the course of talking to the other vendors about Mr. Regan's interest in purchasing the terminal, the other vendors all said they're interested too. So, well, let's see where that goes, huh? And they all said it to me, so it's not like they've all written a check and getting ready to buy it from you, but it appears that it might have a competitive situation going on as well.
Dan,
Number 50.
before you go,
Yes.
just follow up to that question. Is it a sign pretty much, or an indication of the difficulty in finding land?
Absolutely. This, and I'll get into it when we come up, but I was asked to work on the evaluation of the quotes, and I was asked to look into what other options were there for a terminal. And, I'm not a real estate guy, but I happen to have a neighbor who I called him up, and he and I are on our association board together. So we're buds, and we're good old boys. I'll put it that way. We both I got more white hair than he does, but I called him up and I said, so do you know anybody from Coldwell Banker that works out in Stillwater? And he said, I got this guy, and Adam Nyberg. So he called Adam and said, could he call me? And Adam gave me a call. Eventually, he had been down in Florida visiting his dad. Well, it turns out his dad is the real guy that knows everything about Stillwater commercial real estate. So he called his dad back up, and then he, in 2 days, gave me 3 different options that we could put in as terminals. And those 3 options were a property that was in the same development as the terminal, which that's not going to work to go there any more than it is to use the terminal you already own. The other one was the old 916 truck driving terminal that's over in Afton across 94. which would be excellent too, but the district had already looked at that, and Afton had put in some kind of we're not going to do anything for a year. So that one wasn't going to be open.
Yeah.
And then the other one was a terminal down on Quant Road, and the size of that one was too small. It would have been and then I just was looking at it. It's right next to a junkyard, so I'm not sure that I like the security there. Although junkyards, aren't just by their own selves bad, but it's a little more. I'd like a little more control of an area than that. Anyway, did I ramble too far?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Well, maybe, remember, because later on we're going to come back to it probably. And finally, should we be worried about legal ramifications regarding the fact that Minnesota Central was the lowest quoter? It says bidder here, but it was quoter by far. And no, the district really has the option of choosing who they talk to and how they talk to them. So you don't have it. This isn't, it shouldn't be something that turns this discussion. You've got plenty of other issues, but I wouldn't, they understand quoting. They still could do it. They could still argue that they got an unfair shake. But as Dr. Tyne tells me, whose wife is a lawyer, anybody can sue anybody for anything.
No comment.
Is there a lawyer speaking there? Okay. So we've done contract. Did we do vendor yet? We didn't. And this is some of it's, whoops, I forgot to take the contract off too. This little filter function is a very nice function to help us get through this information. Our interest as a district may vary to those of a busing contractors may diverge. I took this to mean that the district's priorities may change from what a busing contractor would wish. And that may always happen. And that's why transportation contracts are signed each year based on anticipated usage. And as things change, the contracts change. You heard that before anyway. Did I get that question pretty close to, does that answer the question? Okay, I guess it does. Okay, why would we not want to negotiate with the 3 remaining vendors as many things have changed since all RFPs were submitted? And the rest of this was really not the question. It's commentary about it. And, I'll say the quoting process allows for one or many vendors. It's up to the district to decide. There are downsides to going with many vendors. The low vendor may not wish to participate. You could lose your lowest price vendor before it starts. I don't need to read all of this to you, but it goes back to, the idea of the reverse auction is dangerous. And it can be dangerous both because you lose some good providers and also because you may end up with somebody who gives you a very good rate for a year and they don't, they provide poor service. I can tell you in our district one time we had a bus company that came in and they had just bought out a large provider down in St. Paul. And they had all of these buses that were old, but they gave us a great rate. And what they did is they just ran those buses until they broke down, and then they would send another bus out because they had extra buses. And in the end, the lesson I learned was you do not ever want to shortcut on anything that has to do with service or safety, because you will pay a price both in the reliability and also your customers, our parents, our kids are going to be irritated by that. I was lucky. Today I can say I was lucky I kept my job. Mr.
That's
Tyne
right.
was there at that time.
I remember that. Is that the one where the company was facing going out of business, Jan?
No, that was before that.
Okay. We did have a situation where one of the vendors that we had was faced with probably not being able to fulfill the contract.
Yeah.
That is a very, very, very scary thing. So. You
I
want
went to
somebody
bankruptcy.
who's going to be in business.
I went to bankruptcy court one Friday, not knowing if we were going to have buses running on Monday. Now, you want to talk about the ultimate insecurity? That was the ultimate. They did run, by the way, and they went bankrupt and out of business at the end of the year.
It's probably right up there with no terminal.
So I don't know if anyone can anyone hear me right now?
Yep.
I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, so for about the past 20 minutes, I've not been able to say anything because my sound was messed up. So John Perry just helped me. I'm actually talking through my phone, but I can see and hear everything that's happening.
Good.
And so I appreciate the conversation. This has been incredibly interesting. But I do just want to say that it is 5:30, and we would like to try to wrap this meeting up on time at 6 o'clock. And so if we could just be mindful of that and try to move the conversation on so that we can finish on time, that would be great.
I will do my best on my part.
You're doing great, Jan. I really appreciate it. This has really, really been interesting. I could sit here for a couple more hours, but I think people probably do have things they want to get to tonight.
I'm just going to tell you, if you're really interested in transportation, you are one of very few people. You know, we're kind of
exciting
the,
is school buses.
we're kind of the ugly duckling of education. You know, we are there, and as they always say, they're the first to see them in the morning and the last to drop them off in the afternoon, and they can make a kid's day, and they can also fix it at the end of the day too.
Absolutely.
Yep. So this was a question about buying the bus terminal. Why we not want to hear what can be offered no matter what group we contract with. I would like to respond to this by talking about the terminal as an asset of the district. One of the things that makes your district interesting and beyond interesting, attractive to vendors who are coming from wherever they come from, is having this taken off of the plate. In other words, this is another piece of that uncertainty. And so if you've got a terminal, and I'm not going to say that, I'm not talking about the price or any of the history of it. I'm just saying, if this asset is there, then Pat Regan, Minnesota Central, First Student, Craft Bus Company, MTN, all know that that's not something that they have to figure out. And in fact, I called around, and Robbinsdale, Orono, East Carver County, Minnetonka, Hopkins School District all have terminals for this very purpose.
Could you, Jan, I'm so sorry. Could you repeat what districts? I didn't know that. What districts again? Orono?
Orono is more of an outer district, kind of a little bit maybe farther out than you, but Robbinsdale, East Carver County, which used to be called Chaska, Minnetonka, and Hopkins. So it's not just
districts around here though.
No, around here, there's a couple things that are going on now. One, for instance, South Washington County owns their own buses, so they have a terminal, but they own their own buses. And Roseville, for instance, we don't own our own terminal, but we have a provider that had a terminal in the district, and actually we have two providers that could compete. That, you know, so in the closer metro area, that's important. But as you get out to, say, Stillwater, if you went to Forest Lake, well, they own their own buses. You know, you go to places where development is kind of filling in, and property prices are high, and cities are not really interested in having a bus terminal or a truck terminal or, you know, other diesel terminal. It's hard for them to find a place to run their buses out of. I heard that there was an option down in Cottage Grove someplace, and it was 12 miles to get into the district. And if you had 24 miles onto everybody's, you know, onto that vendor's price compared to what a vendor that has a terminal in the district, you're going to end up saying that vendor down in Cottage Grove cannot be competitive with the vendor that's in district. So you'll be having that vendor as long as they want to have a good bid. If they're not the vendor that you like for whatever reason, then, you know, you're still kind of stuck with them because they're going to have a better price than everybody else. So the idea of keeping it does have a competitive advantage. My belief is, if you look back at those quotes, those price quotes, let's just go down here and take a look at them. Bottom line, this $4 million differential might be what it would be like if there wasn't the competition because the terminal was there instead of this $600,000 differential. Anyway, it's, you know, you think, well, that's not much. It's not a big deal, but it is kind of a big deal when you are trying to find a bus company. And, you know, back in Roseville, we had problems when when Don Regan brought his company into our district the first time. He ended up starting the school year on a flat piece of ground out there by Unisys, and finally found an old abandoned truck terminal that the city let him have, but only for so many years, and then he had to find somebody else. It is very hard in settled areas to find a good bus terminal.
Can I ask a quick question, Jan?
Sure.
When you were saying that might be what it looks like if we didn't have a terminal, if we do go out to renegotiate with the companies who still say they're interested, with the
Yes.
question, what is going to be your price if we don't have a terminal? Because I hope everybody got to watch the meeting last night, but for sure it sounds like we're not going to have a terminal for at least a year. So won't we be able to know what our advantage is for having a terminal, not having a terminal, based on what their quotes are?
You could ask that question. In my discussion with all of the vendors, they all didn't have an option for a terminal. Although Pat Regan said he could make he could figure it out because he knows a bunch of people in a bunch of places. But he was working on selling me on getting into the bid too, you know, so I'm take it for what it is at this point. That is a real hard thing to know if you're going to be able to use that terminal. That's why I've spent time working with Idris Muhammad, the owner of the Stagecoach site, to at least have an option to lease for those for the coming year. And in fact,
is that something that we're going to know tomorrow when we're expected to have an action item on this?
You're not going to necessarily, I don't believe you're going to know that there's no chance that there's a lease available tomorrow. But I don't think that it's going to be different whether you get quotes or not quotes on that from multiple vendors. You know, right now we're in the process of trying to get him locked in for the coming year. And in the draft of a thing that I just saw this afternoon, came in late, was looked like it had another option for another year if it was possible. I am not a real estate guy, so I'm kind of in deep water on this stuff. You kind of have heard as much as I know.
Jan, I've got a quick question on the numbers that were submitted to us in response to the RFP.
Yes.
Would those be, would we expect those to be similar or identical, whether they were operating out of the Lake Elmo terminal or a Stagecoach terminal? Would those numbers that were provided to us, assuming that we would provide that terminal to them, would the numbers be the same?
The numbers issue will go this way. The new terminal the lease price that I've seen, and I believe it's going to be in that range anyway, is $30,000 a month. That's $360,000. Right now, they are planning on spending $225 on a lease going into the Lake Elmo terminal. So if they go to this new one, and if the district in its lease pushes all of that money over onto the vendor, then that 225 is going to become 225 plus whatever it is, the differential, to 360. And so that means that they're going to have that additional cost basis. So they're going to have to raise their prices in order to this is a pass through essentially both ways. Otherwise, so in other words, the district of it, the problem with that for the district is that the district, if the terminal was there, the Lake Elmo terminal was usable, you get $225,000 goes into general fund. Now that 225 goes to the vendor plus the other 160 or 140, whatever it is. I can't talk and think in this, add numbers in my. I was a math major too, and I can't do that anymore. But that other $100 and some thousand that's going to have to make it up to get to that 360, the district is going to pay for it either from the vendor or themselves directly, depending on how the district decides it's going to do that. If it says we're going to just pay the differential, then the vendors would not have that as a way to raise prices. On the other side of it, that's up to the district to decide what they're doing.
Right. And so we can assume that any lease charges are going to be an added cost. It's going to be an added cost to what we're currently looking at. But I think my question is more of, would the route charges be substantially different than what was provided to us in the responses?
Well, it won't be. It depends on how they want to do it, because they're worried about, if you look at it and you say that it's going to be a 1-year contract, you're going to be not a 4-year contract. It's going to be, however it changes, those will affect route costs. The costs of getting to bus routes from the Stagecoach, which I'm not sure is the question you're asking, shouldn't be any real difference from where they are on 94, and Manning. The Stagecoach is down there on just south. Is it Bayfort? South of Bayfort? Or no, it's next to the prison. So it's in
Oak Park Heights, right?
Oak Park Heights. Yeah, I've only was in that prison once.
Of your own free will.
That was actually
7 to
back
10.
when they were refurbishing school buses in the prison. Okay.
Could I just ask a follow up to that, Jan, to Mark's question? And just historically for the public that is bored today and watching this presentation, I think perhaps Mike was the only one on the board at the time. Shelley, I don't know if you were or not. Perhaps you were, but in 2015 we passed the bond, and as part of the bond, it was a material item in the bond that at the time, the intent. It's my interpretation that the intent of this was to release some of these lease options because of the fact that it would free up dollars in our general fund. And that was the whole, and I see lots of questions and hear lots of questions of why do we do this? And that's what the voters voted on. And I guess, so for me, the question is, it remains, is it accurate to say, Jan, that we will feel an immediate impact to our general fund positively and negatively based on what occurs here? Is that a fair concern, question?
Jennifer, are you asking whether we have a terminal or don't have a terminal?
Yeah, I guess
that's the,
for me, it's the $1 million item. I think, I wasn't part of that. I wasn't on the board at the time. And, I think for, the location of this terminal is fantastic. My goodness, it's so centrally located for our students and where the growth is. To me, it's a good fiscal, I'm in full support of it, despite the noise out there and the politics around it. So for me, I guess, general fund matters. So I guess, Jan, can you speak to, impact on the general fund, and can you make a statement as to that, with a terminal, without a terminal? I mean, I do think it matters. It's an important issue.
I have an opinion on it, and it's a belief that the more competitive situation you have for your transportation process, the less money you spend. And because every transportation dollar, what I like to say to people is I would rather have the dollars go into the classroom than out the back, the tailpipe of the bus. And so if there's ways that you can lower the costs that the bidders are going to bring to it. In other words, if you have a more competitive situation, you've heard me say this before, I'm sometimes sound like a broken wheel, but anyway, my belief is if you've got a contractor that has a terminal and somebody else wants to come in and do it, they're not going to be able to do it unless they find a terminal or build a terminal themselves. When you've taken that out of the out of the mix, then you're looking at that competition that's available where all they have to do is bring buses in. Everybody knows how to move a bus. You get in it and you drive it there. Everybody knows how to get in and out of a terminal. Nobody, and bus companies will say this again and again. And there's 3 bus companies that said, well, I'll buy that terminal. Guess why? Because they know that and actually one guy said, this is a great place because it's right on the freeway. We can, everything is close. I think if you look at the quotes that we got, go back to that again, just briefly. I'm recognizing we're close on time here.
About 10 minutes.
Yep. The $39 million is what you would be looking at as opposed to $35 million if you didn't have a competitive situation, because there would all be having to pay that kind of number.
And
now
I guess
go on down.
Can I ask a quick question? I guess this is what I'm struggling with because that's what we were sold on, that if we had this terminal, we'd be able to negotiate more favorable rates, that whole thing.
Yep.
But then once we say, you know what, we may not be able to use our terminal. Are you still interested? Everybody said yes. I mean, the only 2 that weren't still interested were the 2 that just, it was a time constraint, but it wasn't a location constraint. And that's what really bothers me. And I understand that a lot of people think it's worth spending $8 million to save $120,000 in the general fund, but I feel like there's another way to do that. And what we heard was on March 29th, 2018, that there are going to be about $80,000 to $85,000 annual expenses in owning our own transportation terminal. So it's not we're going to get 200 and something thousand, it's 120,000. And my view has always been, if we want to save 120,000 in the general fund, there are much less painful ways to go about that.
The only place that I would add to the savings is that when you look at a more competitive pricing situation, your prices go down. And this is not nearly, okay, if you got $225 of revenue, 225,000 revenue. What I'm talking about is, what is your bid price? What is your quoted price? And the quoted prices will be higher if you have a less competitive situation, because everybody who comes in knows they're going to have to find a terminal. If somebody has a terminal in there, they could be lower, but they don't have to be lower because they know that they have got a $1 million advantage.
Seems like we're going to see because we're not going to be able to use our terminal.
Well, that's a separate issue, and that's why I'm trying to define these as separate, because in fact, the terminal, owning the terminal is one thing. How you decide what you're going to do about competition is it's important that this is part of the option. And I'm not going to, you're going to make a decision on how to do it, and that'll be what it is. But the board down the road will find it's not as competitive.
Can I jump in? Can everybody hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. Thank you. I think this whole conversation about whether we should have a terminal or not, I mean, there's a lot of complexities, a lot of pros and cons. I am very interested in that conversation. I think we need to spend more time on it. The reality is, though, that this meeting right now is really about a contract for transportation for next year. And our current situation with the terminal is massively unknown right now. So
Yes.
I think when I originally started raising questions about how are we going to proceed with this, I think I talked about it like we need a plan A, and then we need a plan B, and then maybe we need a plan C, perhaps, depending on all the different scenarios. Well, Lake Elmo City Council met last night. They gave us a little bit of a window towards where they're leaning It doesn't look good. I think we're going to need some time to figure out how to make the most of the Hudson Boulevard site. I just don't think it's going to become clear right away. There's just too many different issues. So one thing, because we're getting towards the end of our time here, it sounds like what a lot of people have been kind of mulling over is this idea that maybe we go back to these 3 lowest bidders and we ask them to, as you were talking earlier, Jan, we ask them to rebid or requote. And I think you said something about also make it clear that we would ask them exactly how will you get this job done? How will you provide this service? What does it look like? What problems do you foresee? What challenges are there? And really give all 3 of them the equal chance to provide their very best bottom price. I don't think it's fair that we negotiated with just one company. I think we should have, from the beginning, we should have negotiated with more than one. But, that's water under the bridge. That's okay. Maybe that's how some people do it. That's fine. I have no issues. But I think at this time, that's what we should do. Even if it takes us a few more weeks, I think it's going to get us the best deal. If all 3 of these companies are interested in buying the bus garage, that's something we can explore too. And I don't know how we navigate that, but I think they do need to be 2 separate issues. One is, what is our busing contract for next year and going forward? And 2 is, what are we going to do with our bus garage? It's just too many complexities with that site. We need to deal with them separately.
Board Chair, could I ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
What you're saying is to visit with the 3 low vendors and ask them to submit a quote. Is that right? So far, am I okay?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in the length of time. Are you interested in asking them for a 1, 2, 3, or 4-year quote, or a combination? A 1 year and then maybe a longer period of time?
So I guess just to quickly, well, go ahead if you have another question you want me to answer right away.
No, I think you're right on the money in that the terminal is a separate issue and that's going to have to be dealt with. There's no way that we're going to get around that. And that the board's going to have to make some decisions there. But my driving issue, and I don't want to put words in our superintendent's mouth, but I bet she lays awake at night wondering, am I going to get kids to school come the start day after Labor Day? That's my big concern too. Safely, get them there safely. And I'd also like the board to consider one other thing before we go down the road too far with these can I call it the Stagecoach property? That we get some kind of a feedback from the board on that. So the question would be, if you want us to go out, fine, how long? And do you want us to try to secure that extra site for the buses so that we know where they're going to be located? And how soon should we be acting?
Yes, I think based on what I think all of us watched last night at Lake Elmo, it seems to me we need to go to Plan B, and to me that's the Stagecoach. If we can negotiate his best offer, I think we should do that nowish, very soon. I also think that maybe that plays into whatever the bids coming in from these companies are. Maybe it doesn't matter, but to be able to say to them, we do have a site. It's either going to be the Hudson site or it's going to be Stagecoach, and we know that for sure. I think we need to be able to nail that down. We need a place for the buses.
Right.
So I think it would be really good for us to go ahead and try to get that locked in. I would like to hear from other board members.
Yeah, one question.
I think a 1 year or 2 year would be fine. Maybe he could offer, a both. What would a 1 year look like? What would a 2 year look like? And as far as your other question, John, I think I would be interested to know what a 1 year contract would look like. with the idea being that we will know after a year, hopefully we'll know something more with the Hudson site. And then maybe that looks differently in a year. But maybe a 2-year contract makes sense. And then we do a 2-year at Stagecoach. I'm not sure. I would be open to those possibilities.
Question?
Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, Sarah, previously when we had talked about alternative sites, and I know we did a lot of searching, or at least Kristen did at that time, and this fits in with your idea of a plan B. Is the fairgrounds a possibility for a plan B if we get turned bound by Lake Elmo?
I asked that question.
Do you have an answer for that, Jan? Okay, great.
I did ask that question, and the fairgrounds put some restrictions on it. No,
State fair, our county fair was a big issue, I know.
Yeah, the county fair. And the second part of it was that there is also the township that has some jurisdiction of that. And there was, in the exploration of that, they were not positive in their response of having buses in there.
Yeah, but again, I'm kind of looking at the idea. I think what's a little bit different is a 1 year. Even if there'll be a county fair, of course, we've got COVID on all of that, but I'm just thinking, if nothing else, particularly if that John is given a charge here, whether he does it or he has Tony be his emissary, that might be at least worth the conversation.
Well, things certainly have changed since the school district went through the process, and they did use some of the fairgrounds, I think, with Stagecoach back when they moved away from it. They had some overflow buses there. And
That's correct.
Is that correct? Our time is time.
Oh, yes, I agree.
So anyway, and I think also the treatment of the excess cost of the lease in the quotes to them will be important.
So is this something that we need to vote on tomorrow night, right? I mean, we're not voting on anything in this session. Is that what you're asking, John?
Well, I'd like you to hurry up slowly, but hurry up.
Yeah.
And what I guess I'm saying, the sooner we can get busy visiting with folks, the better off we'll probably be. I want to hurry and get it done, but I want to be smart about it. I want to make sure that any document we deal with, you as a board have an opportunity to review and study and feel comfortable with. That might take an extra few days or a week or more, but I'd rather spend that time with you at a special meeting, let's say, or down the road than worrying about it 6 months from now, what was missing or what wasn't included. So is that making any sense?
So John, our next board meeting is after tomorrow is May 14th. Do you think it's realistic that we might be able to have something by then?
Well, Jan, you're going to have to help me too. But here's what I would suggest. I would like to confer with my boss, the you're all my bosses. I have nobody to boss. I'd like to confer with them, and then it would be nice to have some direction from the board tomorrow night. I don't know, you're not going to act tomorrow night, but you might be able to give work direction to the administrative team. And that work direction might say, do this, do this, do this. And we could put parameters around it. And then what we could do is find out. And I wasn't aware of the fairgrounds. That might be a good option. The Stagecoach, we've already opened up and taken a look at. The vendors have all been contacted. So they are aware that we're going to be coming to them with some adjustments and changes. And then the big elephant in the room, the terminal, that will be what that will be, and we'll deal with that when we have to. I just want to get our kids to school safely.
Can I ask the board, really, this is a question for the board. Given that we have there is a kind of a time issue, right? We're wondering, can we get this done in time and everything? Just as a discussion point here, while we're all on the line, what do we see as the disadvantage? We went through an RFP. What would be the disadvantage of, selecting or talking to with the information we already have, and say, well, what we need to have here is let's just say a 2-year contract with a 1-year out clause. And that's something that we don't necessarily have in the existing RFP, but we say maybe we just want 2 years, and with 1 year, maybe we know where we need to go. But we want your prices in case we want to go 2 years. What would be the disadvantage of simply going with the lowest bidder that we had for that short period of time, so that we can have this issue taken care of? And it's a question for the board.
Yeah.
I think the lowest bidder is the only one who got the advantage to be the lowest bidder. So I agree with what you're saying, that if we said, okay, we want a shorter contract, we go to all 3 that are still interested and say, okay, we want a 2-year contract with 1 year out. What does that look like for you? So then we know we're talking to all 3 that are still interested, and we actually have a true apples to apples comparison. But Minnesota Central was the only one who had the advantage of negotiating.
But even on before they negotiated, they were, even at that point, they were the lowest bidder at that point.
Yeah. A comment I have, though, is this, and I like the option, and I respect the option. Would Central be at the same price if they did what you're proposing?
So that's my question is, I'm concerned about a 2-year contract for, I think what Jan spoke of earlier, when you have a 4-year contract, your costs are depreciated across 4 years instead of 2 years. So we're going to be seeing a higher cost. So is there a way we can get to a place where we're comfortable with the bid, that I think the bid needs to have a clause or something in it, whether we own a terminal or don't own a terminal, what it's going to look like? To me, that's the bigger question. Is I don't know if these bids cover if we don't have a terminal, and then what that would look like. But I think I would be more supportive of trying to find a longer bid just to keep our costs.
Well, and can I just interject? I appreciate all the talk about the dollars, but I'd also like for discussion, the board to maybe speak to the negatives to Minnesota Central, because I haven't yet heard of any. I feel like this is almost a focus on how do we prevent Minnesota Central from getting it. And I'm sure that's not the intent, but it sounds like that to me. And the safety of our students should be at the forefront of this. So yes, the money matters, but oh my goodness, these are our children. So I'd like to hear, I haven't heard much negative. So if we keep delaying, my concern is we're delaying for a reason I have yet to find.
Jen, I'm wondering if you looked at the inspection page that came back comparing everybody.
If that is what your argument is, then let's have that argument in the public, and let's.
No, I'm asking, have you looked at it's in the packet?
No, because we've been talking about money the entire time, and I'm kind of I feel like this is this perpetual delay. So I'm looking.
Well,
I'd like us to make a decision.
We want to get this right, and I think that's what we're trying to do. But the inspections is a part of the presentation that we have. It's the 3rd tab.
I do.
One of the things that the bus company said about the inspections is that a lot of those issues were basically rust related. The buses were old, and in their bid and their proposal, they were bringing in a fleet of new buses so that the issues that were inspection problems for them would go away. The other companies, there was also some errors in the inspections for the MTN, and just to say that, and that wasn't a very good portrayal either.
Well, given the time, can we just pick this up tomorrow?
Yes.
night and hopefully come to some consensus tomorrow.
Are you saying that, I mean, what I'm thinking, or what I've heard several other people say too, and I don't know if this is a consensus or no, but I've heard several people say that could possibly be interested in negotiating with the three, saying, what is the situation going to be if we don't have our own terminal? Because even with Minnesota Central, that was their prices that they gave us were if we had our terminal, and it does not look like that's going to happen, at least for the year. So just because of that alone, I feel like go back to all three, say, what is your price if we don't have a terminal? And then we make our decision from there.
I think the problem is that we can't give direction in a work session.
No, I understand. I'm saying, I think.
So that's what I'm saying. If we pick this up tomorrow and can give direction at the board meeting, that might be the best thing.
In place of the action item.
Yeah. And to respond just a little bit to Jennifer's comment, this really isn't at least for me, it's not an anti-Minnesota Central at all. It's about trying to make sure that our process that we used is fair to all of the companies. It really is. And also, it's at this time, I really feel like we may get better numbers from all three of these companies just because our economic situation has changed. I think their ability to find bus drivers is going to be a lot easier this year. And I think fuel prices obviously have dropped quite a bit. So we may end up with better numbers if we just have them kind of just come in and please just rebid. And we can go from there.
The longer we delay though, Sarah, if we go with someone else, such as anyone else other than Minnesota Central, the longer we delay, the longer it's going to take them to get acclimated to our district and this and that. And I just think there are outside factors other than just money that are at play here. So I just would like everyone to think about that heading into tomorrow night as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good point. Go ahead, Mike.
I'm just saying, in prepping for tomorrow night, I think we ought to, because you asked for it, and I think that's part of what Mark's consideration was, we also think about a plan B, because we may have to fall back on that.
And also, I was going to say, in response to your comment earlier, Mark, why couldn't we have a 4-year contract with a 1-year out?
Maybe that's something we can. I think the reason why we would have an out, regardless, is because of the unsettled situation with the terminal in Lake Elmo. So you could maybe it won't matter in the end what the companies decide, because really what matters to them is the 1-year out. That's going to be the overriding factor in their negotiation position. But so it could be a 4-year, but maybe the important thing is a 1-year. I guess what my point is not to have a 1-year contract, because we don't necessarily want to go back right at this next year this time. Let's try to figure out a longer term solution, but yet have the flexibility to, once we gain greater clarity on what our position is going to be in Lake Elmo, then we can move in that direction.
Okay. Well, I'm seeing that it's 10 minutes after 6. Does anyone have anything further they really feel the need to say right now? Otherwise, I do think Shelley's plan of taking this up tomorrow night so that we can give direction at a board meeting would be probably good for us to do.
Could I ask one clarifying question, Board Chair? And that is,
go for it.
Tomorrow night, when we show up at the table, what are the expectations from you and the superintendent? Would you like Jan there? I think he's going to be able to provide some information and background. So that's my question.
Yes.
Jan doesn't look like he wants to be there.
It's draft night tomorrow night on the football.
Hey, Jan, you and I are on the same page. Question, John, I have in terms of direct, and again, I don't know, but it would seem to me appropriate between now and tomorrow night even a phone call to whoever is in charge of the fairgrounds or whatever, if
Mhm.
that's an avenue at all,
Mhm.
I would like to know that.
Mhm.
Maybe they can't turn it around that quick. So
I think Mike, that's a good question. I think Ben Davis might have a lot of information about that as well. Just, in the interest of, we've got 24 hours. So you might want to check with him. He probably has a lot of info on that.
Absolutely.
By the way, I am glad to come. I'm not.
We'll just know what you're doing, Jan, when you mute yourself and turn your video off.
everything froze on my screen.
I'm doing that. That's it.
He's already on NFL day.
What happened to Shelley? Where did Shelley go?
I think she left.
I just wonder what John's looking at right now.
Well, I'm trying to hear. I couldn't hear, but I just want to make sure that when we show up at the meeting tomorrow night, that you have your expectations met. Nothing's worse than going to a meeting and coming out the door and say, boy, this was not a good night. So I want to make sure that when we sit down and give you the information, you have everything you need to make the best decision for the district and for our kids. So if you have something that you think of, please let the superintendent know, and she'll give me my walking papers.
Okay. I think we've gotten some clarity here. This has been an incredibly interesting and fruitful conversation, I feel. I appreciate everybody's input. It's been really, really cool. And I think that we'll be able to kind of get some, as you said, John, put a fence around it tomorrow night.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
I appreciate all of your work, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. all
Thank
of
you,
them.
Tina. All right. I guess that's it. We will call this meeting adjourned. And I hope you all have a great night. We'll see you tomorrow night.
And tomorrow
Thank
morning,
you,
Tina.
everybody.
Yes, tomorrow morning too.
All right.
Thank you.
See ya.